Please pray with me. May these words that I speak be grounded in my soul, encouraged by the God presence in me. And may these words that you hear be captured by your soul, enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. Put on the whole armor of God. Most of us recoil when language associated with war is used. And rightly so, when we look back over 2,000 years of the Christian church that too many times put on armor that hurt and was violent. And unfortunately, in the 21st century, even though humanity has in many ways become more compassionate, in other ways, fear is causing the traditional language of war to increase. We hear it in the news constantly. Out of fear, we arm ourselves with guns, thinking they will keep us safe. Out of fear, we shield ourselves with barriers and walls to keep others, like refugees and people of different religious groups, away from us. Out of fear, we wear a breastplate of indifference to keep our hearts from engaging and breaking from the realities of so many marginalized people. This is why I feel that this language of war used by the New Testament writer needs to be reclaimed today. In a world where fear-mongering is the dominant way of those in power, in political, economic, and religious circles, now as then we need to respond with a different kind of armor. Choosing to fight violence with violence, even in our language and rhetoric, which is where we do it most often, only increases fear and division. Instead, it seems to me we need to arm ourselves with the qualities that promote love, acceptance, and forgiveness. We need to fasten the belt of truth, put on the breastplate of honesty and integrity, choose shoes that help us walk in peace, hold out that shield of compassion, and don the helmet of liberation, and mostly hold firmly to the sword of the Spirit. Sword of the Spirit of love, a sword that penetrates and heals. I want to share with you this story that for me highlights the futility in a kind of comical way of thinking that we can obtain armor that will protect us completely. And this story is retold by Max Lucado, and he says, I came across an article about a 60-year-old woman who went up a mountain that any novice skier should have avoided. No one would have blamed her had she stayed behind. At 12 below zero, and I'm assuming that's Fahrenheit, even Frosty the Snowman would have opted for the warm fire. Hardly a day to be snow skiing, but her husband insisted. So she went. While waiting in the lift line, she realized she was in need of a restroom, in dire need of a restroom. Assured by her husband that there would be one at the top of the lift, she and her bladder endured the bouncy ride, only to find there was no facility. She began to panic. Her husband had an idea. Well, of course, he's already had two brilliant ones. Why not go into the woods? Since she was wearing an all-white outfit, she'd blend in with the snow. And what better powder room than a piney grove? What choice did she have? She skied past the tree line and arranged her ski suit at half-mast. Fortunately, no one could see her. Unfortunately, her husband hadn't told her to remove her skis. Before she could say, "Shine on, harvest moon," she was streaking backwards across the slope, revealing more of herself than she intended. After all, hindsight is 20/20. With arms flailing and skis sailing, she sped under the very lift she'd just ridden and collided with a pylon. As she scrambled to cover herself, she discovered her arm was broken. Fortunately, her husband raced to her rescue. He summoned the ski patrol who transported her to the hospital. While being treated in the emergency room, a man with a broken leg was carried in and placed next to her. By now, she'd regained her composure enough to make small talk. How'd you break your leg?" she asked. "It was the darndest thing I ever saw. I was riding up the ski lift, and suddenly there was this crazy woman riding backwards with her ski suit down around her knees. I couldn't believe my eyes, so I leaned over to get a better look. I guess I didn't realize how far I'd moved. I fell out of the lift." Then he turned to her and asked, "So how'd you break your arm?" There is no amount, there is no brand of physical armor that could have prevented her broken arm or her broken ego. When you need to go, when the armor is stripped away, you become vulnerable. We almost instinctively want to protect ourselves from being vulnerable, particularly when it comes to our ego, even though it is in our very vulnerability, in our willingness to expose our hearts, to reveal our deepest yearnings. That is when we are truly alive. And that is when we feel the deep and residing presence of Spirit. And we can stand courageously in the world when we change out the armor we amass to guard ourselves for the armor that opens us: truth, honesty, integrity, compassion, liberation, and most of all, to live heart-centered in the spirit of love. The very, very wise old woman that teaches Richard Wagamies about the spiritual life understands this. There is no creed or doctrine or prayer that can give you life. There are no laws or rules or edicts that can guarantee your safety. We learn what it is to be an open-hearted, loving human being by making our own moccasins. From the hide of your experience, she says, all the places we have walked, we sew them with the threads of the teachings, the lessons embedded in all the hard miles. We stitch them carefully with the needle of our intention to walk the spiritual path. And when we're finished, we realize that the Spirit of love, the Spirit of God, lives in every stitch. That's what helps us to walk more gracefully, she concludes. For many years, I gifted the youth I ministered to who were graduating high school the Dr. Seuss book that I read this morning, Oh, the Places You'll Go. The story, although entertaining, carries deep within it the message that the life before us is not predictable. There is no amount of planning that can guarantee or make certain how your life will unfold. Nothing is certain except that every life journey will have good times and not so good times. We'll have times of immense joy and times of great sadness. It is why we need to get busy learning how to sow. We need to pay attention to the moments of our lives. We need to live in those moments, and each moment before us, heart-centered, not head-centered, which is where we are so much of the time, but heart-centered, in that deeper resonating place, where love guides and where love prevails. And if we do this work, we will create the most beautiful moccasins that will help us to walk our life more gracefully, more lovefully, more hopefully, more peacefully, wearing, my friends, a very, very different armor.